The morning of September 13, 1946, dawned grey and cold over Kraków, Poland. In the Montelupik prison, located mere kilometers from the site of the infamous Płaszów concentration camp, one of history's most brutal war criminals was about to face the ultimate reckoning for his monstrous crimes. Amon Göth, the 37-year-old Austrian who had become synonymous with the most sadistic excesses of the Nazi regime, sat in his cell knowing that this day would be his last. The man who had terrorized thousands of innocent prisoners, who had made a sport of murder, and who had embodied the very worst of human cruelty, was about to experience the fear and helplessness he had inflicted upon so many others. The monster's background, Amon Göth, was born into prosperity in Vienna in 1908, the son of a successful publisher. His descent into evil began early when he joined the Austrian Nazi Party in 1931 at age 23, earning him the designation of Alter Kämpfer, or Old Fighter, for his early commitment to the Nazi cause. This early membership would later accelerate his rise through the SS ranks, ultimately leading to his appointment as Commandant of the Kraków-Płaszów concentration camp in February 1943. During his reign of terror at Płaszów, Göth transformed the camp into a hellscape of unimaginable cruelty. The camp housed approximately 25,000 permanent inmates at its peak, with an additional 150,000 people passing through as it served as a transit camp. Göth's methods of control were so extreme that even hardened SS officers found them excessive. The architect of horror survivors described Göth as a physically imposing figure, a huge and imposing man who personally murdered prisoners on a daily basis. From the balcony of his villa overlooking the camp, he would take target practice with his rifle, shooting prisoners who appeared to be moving too slowly or simply for his own amusement. His two dogs, Rolf and Ralph, were trained to tear inmates to death on command. Helen Jonas Rosenzweig, one of Göth's personal maids who survived the war, recalled the absolute terror his presence inspired. "As a survivor, I can tell you that we are all traumatized people. Never would I believe that any human being would be capable of such horror, of such atrocities. When we saw him from a distance, everybody was hiding, in latrines, wherever they could hide. The brutality extended beyond random killings." Joseph Bau, a survivor of Płaszów, provided chilling testimony about Göth's sadistic practices. During interrogations conducted in his office, Göth would hang prisoners by their legs from hooks in the ceiling while setting his dogs upon them. If a prisoner escaped, he would order every 10th person from the escapees' work group to be executed. In one horrific incident, he shot a Jewish man simply because he complained the man was too tall, then urinated on the dying victim. The fall of a tyrant, Göth's excessive cruelty eventually drew attention even from Nazi authorities, who were more concerned with the efficient exploitation of slave labor than gratuitous violence. On September 13, 1944, exactly 2 years before his execution, Göth was relieved of his command and charged by the SS with theft of Jewish property, failure to provide adequate food to prisoners, and violations of concentration camp regulations. These charges weren't motivated by humanitarian concerns, but by the fact that Göth's actions were deemed counterproductive to the Nazi war effort. After being diagnosed with diabetes, Göth was transferred to an SS sanitarium in Bad Tölz, Germany, where American forces arrested him in early 1945. The Americans subsequently extradited him to the restored Polish government, which was eager to prosecute him for his crimes against the Polish people. The trial and conviction. Göth's trial began on July 30, 1946, before the Supreme National Tribunal of Poland in Kraków. He faced 5 counts related to the deaths of over 8,000 Jews, killing Jewish prisoners through beatings, torture and dog attacks, participating in the liquidation of the Kraków ghetto, orchestrating the liquidation of the Tarnów ghetto, liquidating the Sebny labor camp, and stealing money and valuables from victims. Throughout the proceedings, Göth maintained his defense that he was merely following orders from his superiors. However, the overwhelming evidence of his personal involvement in countless murders and acts of torture made this defense untenable. The court found that there was no justification under the law of war for the liquidation of defenseless civilians. On September 5, 1946, Göth was convicted on all counts and sentenced to death. The court specifically noted that he had been found guilty of personally killing, maiming, and torturing a substantial, albeit unidentified number of people, making him the first person convicted of homicide at a war crimes trial. The final hours, the 8 days between Göth's sentencing and execution, passed slowly in his cell at Montelupich prison. This prison, located on Montelupich Street in Krakow, had been used by the Nazis during the occupation and would now serve as the site of justice for their crimes. Göth was one of the first major Nazi war criminals to be executed there, but he would not be the last. On the morning of September 13, 1946, guards came to Göth's cell to escort him to his execution. Unlike the arbitrary and sudden deaths he had inflicted upon his victims, Göth's execution followed proper legal procedures, though it would be no less final. He was led from his cell into the prison courtyard, where a simple gallows had been erected. The execution. The execution site was stark and utilitarian, a wooden platform with a hook and rope hanging from the gallows beam. Surrounding the gallows were several guards and officials who would witness the carrying out of the court sentence. Göth's identity was formally confirmed before his arms were bound behind his back. As he was led onto the platform, witnesses noted that Göth showed no signs of remorse for his crimes. In a final act of defiance that epitomized his unrepentant nature, his last words were reportedly "Heil Hitler," a salute to the regime that had enabled his monstrous acts. The executioner placed the noose around Göth's neck, but what followed was a grim comedy of errors that prolonged the condemned man's final moments. The executioner twice selected ropes of incorrect length, forcing delays in the proceedings. Only on the third attempt was the execution successfully carried out. When the platform was finally kicked away, Göth dropped but did not die immediately from a broken neck, as intended in a proper hanging. Instead, he slowly strangled to death as a guard pulled down on the rope to ensure the sentence was completed. The man who had shown no mercy to thousands of innocent victims received none in return during his final moments. Justice served. Following the execution, Göth's body was taken down and his remains were cremated. In a final symbolic act, his ashes were scattered in the Vistula River, ensuring that no shrine could ever be erected to his memory. The same river had received the ashes of countless victims of Nazi persecution, and now it would also receive those of one of their chief tormentors. The execution took place near the site of the former Płaszów camp, providing a sense of poetic justice for the thousands who had suffered and died under Göth's command. Survivors and local residents viewed his death as long overdue, justice for crimes that defied human comprehension. The legacy of evil Göth's execution marked the end of one of the most sadistic figures of the Holocaust, but his crimes had lasting effects that extended far beyond his death. His relationship with Ruth Irene Calder, a secretary at Oskar Schindler's factory, had produced a daughter, Monika Hertwig, born in November 1945. Calder, devastated by Göth's execution and the revelation of his crimes, committed suicide in 1983. Hertwig grew up struggling with the knowledge of her father's crimes, eventually writing a memoir titled "I Do Have to Love My Father, Don't I?" in 2002. The trauma continued into the next generation when Hertwig's daughter, Jennifer Teague, discovered at age 38 that her grandfather was Amon Göth. Teague, who is of mixed German and Nigerian heritage, wrote her own book titled "My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me," recognizing that under Nazi racial laws, she would never have been allowed to exist. Historical significance: the execution of Amon Göth represented more than just the end of one man's life. It symbolized the attempt to bring justice to the victims of Nazi atrocities. His death served as a warning that those who commit crimes against humanity will ultimately be held accountable, regardless of the authority under which they claim to have acted. The meticulous documentation of Göth's crimes during his trial created an invaluable historical record of the Holocaust's horrors. Survivor testimonies, including those of Helen Jonas Rosenzweig and other camp inmates, ensured that the full extent of Nazi brutality would not be forgotten or denied. Göth's story gained renewed attention decades later through Steven Spielberg's 1993 film Schindler's List, in which Ralph Fiennes portrayed him with chilling accuracy. Fiennes' performance, which earned him an Academy Award nomination, brought Göth's crimes to a new generation and demonstrated how individual choices during the Holocaust could lead to either salvation or damnation. Conclusion. The execution of Amon Göth on September 13, 1946, closed one of the darkest chapters in human history. His death represented justice for the thousands of innocent people he had murdered and tortured during his reign of terror at Płaszów. Unlike his victims, who faced arbitrary and sudden death, Göth received a legal trial and was afforded due process, rights he had denied to those under his power. The botched execution, requiring 3 attempts to complete, seemed almost fitting for a man whose life had been marked by incompetence, masked by brutality. In his final moments, as he slowly strangled at the end of a rope, Göth experienced a fraction of the suffering he had inflicted upon thousands of innocent people. His death served as a reminder that no matter how powerful evil may seem in its moment, justice can still prevail. The witnesses to his execution, many of whom had lost family members to Nazi persecution, saw in his death not just punishment, but the restoration of moral order to a world that had been temporarily dominated by monsters like Amon Göth. Today, the site of the former Płaszów camp serves as a memorial to its victims, while Göth himself is remembered only as a cautionary tale of what humans are capable of when they abandon their humanity. His execution stands as proof that those who commit the most heinous crimes against their fellow human beings will ultimately face judgment for their actions.